What's going on, you guys? You're tuned into the Cutting Room Knife Review. I'm your host, Garrett, and today we have one of the most famous models of pocket knife ever. And this isn't going to be so much of a review today, as I'm sure everybody watching knows what model this is. I'm sure everybody watching this has probably watched a review of this model before. And I'm not breaking any new ground by reviewing this knife, but it is probably the most popular, if not the most, one of the most popular pocket knives of all time. And I think that it really deserves, a model overview. And because it's a knife that I use in in every single episode as a reference knife, I probably should go over this knife with you guys and really give you my thoughts and opinions on it, because it's one of my absolute favorite models of all time. And I constantly use it as a reference for other knives that I'm reviewing. And the model that I'm talking about, of course, is the Spyderco ParaMilitary2. What's up, guys? I'm Garrett. You're tuned in to the Cutting Room Knife Review, where I review knives, blades, and all things sharp. Please like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you more killer knife content. Now, the Spyderco ParaMilitary2 comes from the military series of Spyderco knives, and it's one of the lines of Spyderco that has put Spyderco on the map, just like the Delica and Dura and Della line. The military line of Spyderco knives is completely just iconic, and has ran for a very, very long time, basically uninterrupted. These knives have been available way longer than I've been collecting knives, and probably way longer than most of us have been collecting knives. But they remain relevant today, and they are still one of the best choices for a large side of medium pocket knife and a hard use pocket knife. So now the Spyderco ParaMilitary2, or PM2 for short, is the middle sibling in its family of knives. So the military family of Spyderco knives originated in 1996 with the original military model. And when they released the military model, it was released for deployed soldiers, and Marines and sailors, and it was designed for the military. It was designed to be used, in combat, essentially. The story goes that a friend of Sal's, I believe, Sal Glesser, the creator of Spyderco, approached him and said, if my son was to go to, into the military and go off to war, what knife would you recommend him take with him? And, or something along those lines. And I'm not sure if Sal created the military model for said person, or that was just the spark that made Sal make the military model. But basically, it was the model of knife that Sal Glesser, the creator of Spyderco, made that he would send his son off to war with. And it was a very large knife. It's a pocket sword of a knife, but to be used outdoors, to be used, by the military, it makes sense. And if you're going to use it for self-defense, it's a big, burly knife. But in my opinion, it's a little impractical. And I think that's what most people's opinions are. I don't currently have a military model. I owned a Crucarda military at one point in time, and it just was too big for me, and I let it go to somebody who wanted it. So the ParaMilitary2 was released in 2010 and is a compact version of the military model, and which is funny because there's nothing really compact about this knife unless you compare it to the military. But the original military had a backlock, but looked essentially a lot like the ParaMilitary2, just stretched out. But the ParaMilitary2 offered the compression lock, which is absolutely awesome, and a much more usable size. So this knife came around in 2010, and a few years later, in 2016, the even more compact, and this is more of a compact knife and more realistically compact, Spyderco Para 3 came out, and this is kind of, the little sibling of the whole family, and is much more of what I consider a pocket knife size knife. And so this rounds out the family. In 2022, I believe, the military kind of got revamped, and it became the Military 2, and it was given a compression lock on the back, and basically it's just an oversized. It's funny, I would call it an oversized PM2, even though the PM2 is a size down military, really. But the military is not anywhere near as popular as the ParaMilitary 2 or the Para 3, for that matter. The original is the least popular, and it's basically because I think it's the least useful day to day for a civilian. It's just frankly too big, and I like bigger knives, and it's just too big for me. It's a complete pocket sword. So there are many different variations of the ParaMilitary 2 that have came out over the years. There are very many variations that are just currently available. One of the coolest things about Spyderco and its flagship models like the ParaMilitary 2 is that there's many options within the knife model that you can go to. You can have the base models all the way up to very exotic models, and even models that have different unique blade shapes, where it's starting to become not a different knife, but a very different flavor of that knife. And it's just great because Spyderco has these models like the Mannix 2, the ParaMilitary 2, the Para 3, the Shaman, where there's so many different variations of these models of knives that you can almost become, like a ParaMilitary 2 collector. Like, I not only collect Spyderco, but I collect this specific model of Spyderco, and you have lots and lots of knives to choose from. Well, with that being said, let's take a look at the ParaMilitary 2 and what makes it so special. Let's take a look at its measurements and materials and just what makes up this iconic knife. So as far as the ParaMilitary 2 or PM2 is concerned, I'm going to go through the dimensions of the knife and the materials of the knife with the knives that you can actually go purchase now, and with the traditional blade shape. So this in particular is the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 Salt model, and it is pretty much one of the more like traditional ParaMilitary 2s that I have here. I don't have a base model to show you, but this is probably the closest thing to it. So the overall length of the ParaMilitary 2 is 8.25 inches. It has a blade length of 3.44 inches with an exact 3-inch cutting length. Now, that is a fairly large knife, but it turns out it is one of the most useful sizes and basically perfect everyday carry sizes for me. It's on the larger side for everyday carry, but it's really capable. It doesn't feel huge in my pocket. It doesn't feel overly big in my hand. The blade isn't overwhelming to use, but it also feels robust and like I don't need any more. I'm not going to be really often asking for a whole lot more knife than this, or getting myself into situations that this knife doesn't have what it takes to, cover my ass in it, so to speak. The blade thickness of this knife is 0.14 inches, so it's not shabby. It's fairly thick through the blade stock, which is good. It's going to be durable. It does get pretty thin behind the edge. It is a full flat grind like we see Spyderco doing these days. It's a clip point style blade, but Spyderco's clip point looks like this, kind of bird skull shape. It's a very unique, very much screams Spyderco. But it's a really good blade shape, very slicey and very pokey as well. So takes care of a lot of bases. it stays pretty thick through the spine of the knife and doesn't really get too thin until the very end of the edge, leaving the knife to be pretty darn durable. So what we have is a handle that is 4.81 inches, and that's honestly a pretty big size handle, but it's really comfortable. The ergos on this are perfect. They're legendary. It really doesn't get much better than this. The choil has jimping in it, as well as the thumb area right here, little ramp that you can push up against the spine. Both have jimping, really good grip on this knife. It does have basically a big full hand of scale, but the G10 scales, especially these that have, the cutouts in them, are very light, and it doesn't bother me to have so much scale in my hand. It doesn't feel like a huge knife, even though it is pretty big. Now we have a stainless steel hardware. We have a stainless steel clip that comes on the Spyderco. We have the compression lock comes on the Spyderco, and we have nested liners on this knife, as we do most G10 Spyderco knives. Now, the base models of Spyderco come in CTS BDN1 and CPM S30V steels. They have just came out with a lightweight model, which I don't have my hands on yet. I don't even know if I'm going to get my hands on it yet. I believe it is a CTS BDN1 steel that has been released, and FRN scales. Not really too interested in it. Spyderco's this PM2 is light enough as it is. Some people love the FRN scales. They like the extra thinness of it. They like it for multiple reasons, and good for them. It makes a really waterproof knife. It's really good for like the Salt series. I'll give it that. But this knife is just fine for me. Runs on washers, has really good action, like we know from Spyderco. It's a Golden, Colorado factory Spyderco. The ParaMilitary 2s are made in the United States. So a funny thing is that Spyderco sends out the ParaMilitary 2 assembled to be carried tip facing down, which is kind of a cardinal sin for pocket carry. Most people like tip facing up, where the clip is going to be on the outside of your pocket and the blade faces inward to the back of the pocket. That way the blade can't open. We pull the knife out of our pocket and it's ready to rock. Well, the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 comes with it installed up here, and it would sit in your pocket like this, and really there's no chance of it really opening in your pocket, but when you pull it out, it's kind of in a weird spot for your hands. It never really bothered me, but a lot of people trash talk it. And I mean, I had this knife set up in it forever. You can still see that the micarta is not worn evenly because I had just left it the way it was. But my short that I originally made of this knife got trash talked because of it. It's all in good fun. But the reason that they come assembled carry tip down is because they're meant to be kept on a plate carrier. And if you were to grab them off a plate carrier, if you think about it, you're going to pull them up off the plate carrier, out of the molly straps this way, and then it's going to be in your hand ready to rock. And it makes so much sense that if you're carrying it on a plate carrier, to have the clip on this side. So being that it's a military model, that's how they come. The Para 3 does not come that way. The Para 3 comes facing tip up, but it is obviously a pocket knife. This ParaMilitary 2, I guess, can still be considered, a pretty viable choice as far as a carry goes for the military. And so they come assembled like that. So this is the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 in their Salt version, which has MagnaCut steel as far as the blade steel goes. This one is DLC coated, just made to be used in crappy weather conditions, should not corrode or rust, made to be used in and around the ocean. It's a good choice for that. It has extra grippy cutouts in the G10. Obviously, if this knife gets wet, it's still not going to slip out of your hands. And that's basically the gist behind the Salt model of ParaMilitary 2. I also have the Crucarta ParaMilitary 2, which is a crewwear steel and then micarta liners. This knife does have full steel liners, unlike the other base model Spyderco ParaMilitary2s. Most Spydercos don't have exposed liners like this, but the ones that have micarta do. Crewwear is a great tool steel. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. This was basically my first ParaMilitary2, and it's still perhaps my favorite. I love this as a work knife. I beat the hell out of this knife. As you can see, I've learned to sharpen on this knife. Doesn't quite have the, has a great edge on it, but it doesn't quite have the same shape that it once did because, like I said, I learned to sharpen on this knife. But this knife does work, and it works well, and it kicks ass, and it has an incredible edge on it actually right now. It's a real iconic version of the ParaMilitary2. And if you're going to get one for work, as long as you're not going to be getting it wet all the time, I really do recommend the Crewwear, the micarta ParaMilitary2. The micarta gets this nice kind of dirty, scruffy looking patina to it. The blade will eventually get a little bit of a patina to it because it's a tool steel. Takes an amazing edge, holds an amazing edge, tough as nails. I speak really highly about Crewwear, and I think this is a great knife as far as a work knife goes. And one of the things about the Spyderco ParaMilitary2 is that it's relatively inexpensive for how nice of a knife it really is. They don't really use high-end handle materials like titanium, but you don't need it. It's not really what I like in a hard use knife anymore. I mean, to be honest with you, like titanium's great, but like if I'm really am taking a knife to work, G10 or micarta or carbon fiber are all just fine. And I'm probably going to get the knife dirty and scuffed up anyway. So spending a lot of money on a titanium knife that I'm bringing to a job site, I do it anyway. But that might not be for everybody. And you can really get a lot of knife for your money out of this knife. And they basically start around $160. And I think that's what the lightweights are going to be starting at now because Spyderco has raised its price. Because Spyderco has raised its prices this year. But for, the upper $100 range, like the above 180, I don't know, upper $100 range probably doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. But in the $100 to $200 range on the upper side of that, like the $180 ish range is where you're going to start paying for a ParaMilitary2. And then you're probably going to get up to around the $250 range is where it's going to cap out for the highest and most exotic models. At least that are, not being sold by like Bento Box or any of the very, very exclusive, knife stores that have very, very, exotic limited edition ParaMilitary2s. But if you're going to get like a Rex 121 steel or something of that nature, usually the PM2 winds up being about $220 to $260. You see the Crewwear is going for probably right around the $200 range is a good price to look for them. You might see them a little bit over that, might see them a little bit under that. I really haven't priced out the PM2 since this price hike has gone into effect. So I know about what the prices are, but I'm not actually sure the exact amount for each model. So there's a lot to choose from as far as the standard ParaMilitary2 goes. You can go anywhere from S30V, S45VN, Maximet, Rex 121, Crewwear, MagnaCut, CTS BDN1. There have been CTS XHP, CTS 204P, I believe. I've got to be missing stuff there. I'm pretty sure there's an M390 out there, and there's an S90V Sprint Run out there. M4, there's definitely been M4 out there, and I do believe that there is a K390 you can get through Bento Box out there as well. So lots of different options. Typically, what you're going to see is every different model of Spyderco is going to have a different color or material for the handles. So like micarta with the Crewwear is going to have these brown micarta handles. S45VN typically has either black handles or black G10 or camo G10. Spy 27, a steel I didn't list off, is definitely available in ParaMilitary2, which will have a blue scale. S110V, another steel I didn't name off for a ParaMilitary2, has a a navy blue scale, so on and so forth. They kind of, the colors of the scales kind of denote which blade steel it has. They kind of correlate, and if you can, memorize which is which, you can kind of tell what you're looking at from far away without actually reading what the steel says on the blade. Now, the ParaMilitary 2 has become such an iconic knife and such a giant model with so many different offerings. They've actually offered different blade styles over the years. And currently, the most current iteration of a different blade style that's been released is the Spyderco ParaMilitary2 Wharncliffe. Now, this is the older Knife Joy exclusive in CTS XHP. They recently released another Wharncliffe through them with orange scales, albeit they had a little bit more of a design carved into the G10 in Rex 121. And word on the street is they are going to be releasing a DLC version of the same knife a little later this year. So if you missed out on it, you still have an opportunity to get yourself a DLC version of this. But I promise you, it will probably sell out within moments. So be ready with, all your your wallet on your iPhone ready to go, just so you can just click away and hopefully get yourself one of these, because they are hard to come by. And on the aftermarket, these exotic blades, where they're not the traditional Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 blade with the clip point, they get expensive. And I can say I paid a pretty penny for this knife. I hunted around for this knife for a long time. This was the model that was elusive to me. And it is one of my absolute favorites of all time. I love Wharncliffe blades. ParaMilitary 2 is not known for being a Wharncliffe, but the ParaMilitary 2 and Wharncliffe is absolutely amazing. I'm a big fan of CTS XHP steel. It's like a stainless D2, it's like super D2, and it's just a great working steel. And I think it has a beautiful, beautiful grain structure to it. And I've fallen in love with this knife, and I'm really glad I got this version of it. Now, there's really two other main blade styles, and I don't have one of them. I don't have the Emerson blade, and it has a saber grind, I believe, and then it also has the little Emerson. It's like a T-stop on the top of it right here, where if you pull it out of your pocket, it catches on your pocket and flips the knife open for you. Pretty cool. I don't have it, and I wasn't going to go searching for it. The prices that I found before I shot this episode were astronomical for it, and I just didn't feel like sending it, guys. So sorry I can't show you that example of a Spyderco ParaMilitary 2, but I can show you this one. This is the very famous Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 in the Blade HQ exclusive Tonto blade. And this is a cool knife because not only is it an exclusive style of blade, it's the only Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 that has a hollow grind or a compound grind, which this has both. So this nice grind up on the swedge. We have this flat grind for their secondary edge or bevel. And then we have, through the flats, we have a hollow grind on this knife. Now this is in CPM, S30V, and which is a base model steel, but in my opinion, S30V is a great steel anyway. There's nothing wrong with it. Some people say it's chippy. I've never found it to be too chippy, as far as how I use it. I don't really use my knives for pry bars, so there you have it. This knife, of course, has aftermarket scales on it. These are metal embossed scales. Not really a big fan of metal embossed scales. These are all right. They're pretty heavy. Titanium scales. Has amazing action. I'll give it that. This knife I got from my buddy Seth, and it is tuned impeccably. And I was very blessed to be able to get this knife from Seth because he didn't charge me an arm and a leg for it. And these go for a lot of money on the secondary market. You can find these, they typically retail for around $265 when they are available, and they haven't been available in a couple of years, just like the Wharncliffe is. About $265 is what the asking going rate was. Maybe more now. There's a price hike, but most of the time you find them over $300, $400. Like $400 is pretty common to see this knife, and you can see it. People on Blade Bench scalp numbers all the way up to $600-$700 for these things. And, some people are willing to pay it. I'm not. And I was able to get a very good deal from a friend who passed this knife on to me, and I'm very blessed to have it. I'm pretty much sure that I'm going to be changing these scales out eventually, mostly because it's heavy and just hard to carry with how just bulky these scales make it feel. But yeah, this is a good example of what a modded PM2 looks like. Once again, running on washers, has just great smooth action. The blade is an amazingly just good size geometrically to the handle. The pivot is in basically the perfect spot. This knife design is just bonkers good. It's iconic for a reason. It just plain works, and it is a work of genius. This knife design is above and beyond what most knife designs are. It just is. And the cool thing about it is it doesn't cost an arm and leg to get one. Almost everybody who collects knives can save up enough money that they can afford themselves and experience the PM2, which is one of my favorite parts about this knife. It's so good and it's so accessible. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's cool. It's like an import tuner. It's one of those models from Spyderco that's so popular. It's been around for so long. There's tons and tons and tons of aftermarket options for it. You can get micarta scales. You can get titanium scales. You can get carbon fiber scales. You can get all kinds of stuff for this knife. You can get different washers for it aftermarket if that's your thing. People do lots of stuff to these knives. They mod them lots of different ways, and it's just cool. It's a knife you can really make your own. So, with that being said, that's basically the overview of the Spyderco ParaMilitary2. Now I'm going to take the ParaMilitary2 and compare it to some other knives rather than compare my other knives to my PM2. So let's check that out. So the Spyderco ParaMilitary2. Let's play by the rules and compare it to the Spyderco. As I hit my camera. Let's compare it to the Spyderco Para 3. And as we can see, these are obviously related knives, but we have basically a smushed version of this knife. They're essentially the same thing. The handle, this is aftermarket handle, so it's a little bit thinner, but they basically just took the ParaMilitary2 and smushed it to make a Para 3. We have a knife here where we can hold it back or choke up on it. You basically have 2 grip points on this knife with a 3.5-inch blade. You have 1 grip point on this knife with basically a slightly under 3-inch blade. And if I was going to pick one for everyday carry, I'd probably pick the ParaMilitary2, although I find myself carrying the Para 3 a whole lot. I think the Para 3 is one of the best compact knives you can get. It's a great choice for a compact knife for work. A lot of times on the job site, this is all I need and all I want. But if it really comes down to being able to handle every task, I would rather have this knife if it was my only knife, because I can still do all the small tasks with this knife. This is still a very controllable knife. It's still a very controllable blade. This blade isn't getting away from me, although it's about the size where the tip end is about as far away from me as I like as far as control goes with my knife. But I'm able to choke up on it very easily. It fills my hand well, but doesn't feel like it's too much in my hand. It's not overly thick. It's not too long. It doesn't stick out crazy past my pinky, but definitely full grip, very comfortable, and small enough in my pocket that it doesn't feel like a huge knife. ParaMilitary2, same thing, just not as much knife, just a littler guy. Really takes up kind of about the same amount in your pocket, at least as far as thickness goes. The length in your pocket really isn't what's eating it up. It's this space right here, which is why the Mannix is such a beefy carry. It's not really because it's such a beefy knife, but just the way it folds up, it just eats a lot of your pocket away. So, in all practicality, I think the ParaMilitary2 is the winner between the Para 3 and the ParaMilitary2. Lots of people think otherwise. Fair assumption, but for what I use it for, the ParaMilitary2 wins out as far as those go. Now, another really popular knife that we see compared to the ParaMilitary2 all the time as far as Spyderco's most popular knife goes and most usable knife goes is the Mannix 2. And they're basically the same size. They're really close to the same size. And this is, of course, an upgraded Mannix 2. I have aluminum scales on them, and it's a little bit different than the stock scales, but essentially, this is just a little bit thicker of a knife in my hand. I feel like there's just a little bit more knife there. There's a little bit more blade here with the leaf shape. It just doesn't feel quite as compact, but they basically feel very similar in size. I'm not really sure which one I think I would say would do more work. There's more steel on the blade as far as this one goes, but basically, this is going to be a personal preference thing, guys. Some people just love Mannix 2s. They love the ball bearing lock. They love the way the knife feels in the hand. I'm one of those people. I love this knife. I love both these knives. And this is one of those times where I really can't make a good judgment call. I'm such a fan of the Mannix 2, especially this 15V with the aluminum scales and like the lightweight clip. It's just a fantastic knife. This is one of my best users. As you can see, like I use the heck out of this thing. It's the aluminum's beat up. The Cerakote is, definitely wearing off. You can see that, the pocket clip's all worn down. The edges of this are just, wearing out because I use this knife. This comes to work with me a whole lot. I love this 15V blade. But if I was going to take one with me for the rest of my life, I take the Spyderco. Take the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2. And honestly, I'd probably take this one. I'd probably take the Crew Wear if I was just going to use one for the rest of my life. I just happen to love this knife so much. Mannix 2, ParaMilitary 2, very similar in size, very similar in uses. Kind of just like, what do you want to get out of your knife? The blade shape is a little different. The edge geometry is a little bit different. The carry, the feel is a little bit different. How your thumb sits on the knife is going to be a little bit different. But, at the end of the day, they're both going to do similar jobs very, very well. The Mannix 2 kind of has a blade shape a little bit more like, or at least an edge shape a little bit more like, a sheep's foot, if you will. It still has a good point on the end of it, but this definitely has more of a belly through the tip, more like a drop point, or clip point. So just how you like your edge geometry might be the reason that you choose between one or the other. Which one am I choosing? Maybe it's nostalgia, but I'm going to go with the ParaMilitary 2. Now, lastly, as far as Spyderco goes, we have the Shaman. And it's essentially a similar size to the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2, but it is a much beefier blade. It's basically the sized up version of the Native 5. And, the Shaman to the ParaMilitary 2 is kind of like comparing the Native 5 to the Para 3. A little bit more finesse, a little bit more thickness. Where your thumb sits is flat on the top of the spine. Where your thumb sits on this, it rides up the back of that ridge. Now, which would I choose out of these two? It depends how hard of work I need. If I have to do a really burly job, I'm really afraid of breaking my knife, or I just really want something that's just gonna be heavy duty, I'm gonna choose the Shaman. And I love the Shaman. I love the way it looks. I love these Aramis scales on it. This knife just looks cool to me. But, once again, if I was going to choose one for the rest of my life, I'd probably still choose the ParaMilitary 2. And maybe it's just because I love this knife and I've grown. It was the first knife that I ever thought was cool. It was the first knife that I ever was like, wow, when I get that knife, I'll be set. when I get that knife, this was the first grail for me. And it's silly. I feel silly saying that Spyderco ParaMilitary 2 is a grail for me, but price aside, it was the coolest thing going, at least in my world, for a long time. And it stayed in my pocket the whole time. And it's probably been the knife that's been in my pocket for the longest. The Para 3 and the ParaMilitary 2 are probably the two longest running knives that have been in my pocket and just get constant rotation week in and week out. That's not to say I don't carry the Shaman a lot. It's not to say I don't carry the Mannix 2 a lot, but I carry the ParaMilitary 2 more. I just do. It's just so well rounded. Now, we finally have the Seki City side of Spyderco, and this is the Andela, as you might be able to read right there. And this is the Warncliffe version of the Andela. So let's compare it to the Warncliffe version of the ParaMilitary2. These are essentially the same sizes, do the same jobs, have similar edges. This one's in K390, this one's in CTS XHP. We have G10 scales, like that comes on the American models. These are FRN scales with a back lock, like comes on the Seki City models and the Delica family. So the Delica family basically has its three main siblings. It has the Delica, the Endura, and the Andela. I'm sorry, the Delica, the Andela, and the Endura, just like the Spyderco military series has the Para 3, the ParaMilitary2, and the military, and they go up in size and they pretty much correlate. And so if you're comfortable with one or the other, if you're comfortable with your Seki City knives and you really like the Andela, the ParaMilitary2 is going to be a really comfortable, really nice knife to use and utilize as far as a transition to a Golden Colorado knife if you're just not familiar with them for whatever reason. If you're not familiar with Seki City knives, and you're really used to a ParaMilitary2 and you want to try something out with K390, grab the Andela Warncliffe. I think it's been discontinued, but you can still find them all over the place. And this knife kicks ass, man. This knife is a workhorse. This knife is very underrated and very inexpensive for how freaking awesome it is. Just, you don't need to get it wet unless you want a knife patina. Pretty much K390 is going to patina on you no matter what. As far as budget knives go, it's funny. I wanted to bring out some knives that were like budget knives to compare to the ParaMilitary2, but like in reality, when you don't talk about knives like this, and you talk about, base models, let's say, the Salt, you're looking right around like $200, which isn't a budget knife, but it's not so like outrageously outside of where budget knives sit that, it's really worth comparing a bunch of budget knives to it. So I brought out the Vosteed Martin 330, and it's not quite the same size as the ParaMilitary2. The Raccoon is kind of like getting to the same size as the ParaMilitary2 as well. But they're kind of like similar feels. There's a little less blade on this knife, a little less handle. It's just a little bit smaller. It's kind of right in between the Para 3 and the ParaMilitary2. But my point isn't so much that this knife is like this knife or it's a good replacement for this knife. If you want a cheaper knife, if this knife costs you $120, $130, for CTS, or I'm sorry, for 154 CM and Vosteed quality grinds and, Vosteed quality knife, which is, it's nice, but it's not a Spyderco. Like Vosteed doesn't make knives as nice as Spyderco. I don't care. You can fight me on that one. I just not anywhere close. They're not in the same ballpark. You could probably save another $60 and buy this knife. And so that's kind of what I think is so cool about the ParaMilitary2 is that like this being in your pocket is really the same quality as knives that are way more expensive than it. It probably, those knives might not have G10 scales, but the reality is you're getting so much knife for so little money with Spyderco. It's really incredible. With Vosteed, you want to get up into nicer steels, S35 VN, and you're going to be like paying basically what you pay for a ParaMilitary2 in a nicer steel, like S45 VN, or Magna Cut for that matter, or Crew Wear. And so I don't really see a real reason or real correlation between trying to take more budgetish knives, and this isn't even one of my budget bangers, and really comparing it too much to the Spyderco ParaMilitary2, because I don't think that this knife is like out of the question to expect somebody to be able to save for. Like if there's lots of options if you don't want to spend $200 on a knife that are plenty good knives. But for the price, this knife is so good and it's so accessible. Like that, $150 to $200 price point that it sits in isn't really that high for as far as pocket knives goes. And I'm trying really hard right now not to be rude. I'm really trying hard not to be um, elitist. I'm trying not to I'm not trying to call this a cheap knife, because it's not. This knife costs a good amount of money, but it doesn't cost so much money that I think anybody couldn't achieve it. That's basically what I'm getting at. Because you get in knives like this, and this is like a $300 knife. It's got titanium, but like, okay, it's a MagnaCut blade, it's flat ground, runs on bearings, but it's made in China. This is made in the United States. This is, like arguably, like this has good action on it, but this has really good action on it too. That like which would I rather have? The Berg Alpha or the Spyderco ParaMilitary2? Well, if I could only choose one, I'm going to choose the ParaMilitary2. I just am. It's going to be more of a workhorse. The bearings in this aren't going to allow it to be getting as dirty as this knife. This knife can't, take on the weather that this knife can. And really, like, you're getting titanium, you're getting some stuff, but like, this knife is cheaper than this knife. And that's pretty wild. This is less expensive than, a lot of knives that are, these are great knives, but these are Chinese made OEMs. This is a Golden Design Works caliber. Great knife. Totally different knife than the ParaMilitary2. Close to the same size. But this knife costs considerably more than this knife. And when it comes down to it, like, this is a better tool. This is a flashier knife, really good knife, really good tool. Nothing wrong with this knife. I love this knife. But it really came down to, trusting my life to something. Bring it to the job site. I'm trusting this knife, and you're getting it for hundreds of dollars less. And now when you're really competing, knives that this knife really competes with are going to be knives like this, the TRM Atom. So the Three Rivers Atom, this is the Mike Irie hollow grind. It has a titanium scales, but we're pushing $500 with this knife, and this is like the highest end TRM Atom, because it's got the blue lizard skin and the Mike Irie hollow ground blade. But it costs more than the ParaMilitary2 does, and most of these have a flat grind. They're the same steel. They come in G10 or carbon fiber or micarta. They don't all come in titanium, and they start at like $285, $300. And you can get this knife for $100 less. And while this is a great knife, this is a great knife too. They are completely competitive with each other. Now we're going to get into a Hinderer Eclipse. Same size, same blade steel. This is a hollow grind. It's a fancier knife. It's running on bearings. It has incredibly good lockup, has really good action on it. It's definitely got a fancier design. But, we're charging $450 for this knife. This is a $180, $200 knife. This is more than double the price. Do they compete with each other? They certainly do, and you're not out of your league to compare a ParaMilitary2 to an Eclipse. Is this fancier? Yes, it's fancier. As far as the work it does, is the ParaMilitary2 going to balk to this one? No, it's really not. You can even get into knives like this. You can get into like a CRK Inkosi. Now, this is a large size Inkosi and Seago from Chris Reeves. This has been DLC coded, so it's had some aftermarket mods to it. But out the door, this costs about $500. This knife costs about $200. Where's the $300 difference in this knife? Is CRK that much better than Spyderco? CRK probably finally is a better knife than the PM2. This is about where the returns are starting to come back, to where you have maybe a more durable, harder use, better quality knife, better grind. It's a hollow grind. It's a better blade. Chris Reeves is probably putting more hands-on manufacturing than the Golden Colorado Spyderco is, but you're paying like 3 times the amount for this knife that you are for this knife. So this knife hangs with knives that are just so much more expensive than it. You have to pay so much more money for another brand's knife to give you what you can get out of the ParaMilitary 2. And I think that's why it's so special. You have such a good knife, such a workhorse. You have such an amazing just work of art. This is a legend for a reason. So that's basically my take on the ParaMilitary 2. It is, for the money, probably the best knife that you can get in its size as far as a hard use, hard working pocket knife. Now, there's going to be people that have different opinions than me, and that's totally fair. But I think that for your money, it is really, really hard to compete with the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2. I think it's kind of a unicorn as far as its price to quality goes. I think it's price to usability. I think it's price to, it's competition. It is just at the top of its league. And there is a reason that I compare every other knife that comes across this table, whether it's, an exotic, grail knife, or it's a fairly budget knife or lower price knife, we'll say. I compare them all to the ParaMilitary 2 because, in my opinion, it is the gold standard. And at that, I'm going to end this little ode to the ParaMilitary 2. It's not so much of a review, just as my take on it. And I really think that this knife is a knife of legend. And I think that we definitely can say that every knife collector, in my opinion, should have a PM2 in their collection. I think there's one out there for you, if not 4. So for now, that's what I'm going to leave you with. This is the Spyderco ParaMilitary 2. I'm Garrett with the Cutting Room Knife Review. Until next time, guys, stay sharp.